Welcome to the Phoenix Insider, your all-access pass to the stories shaping the future of mobility and health equity. Each episode, we dive into real-world challenges and innovative solutions that impact transportation access in communities across the country. From candid conversations with industry leaders to first-hand accounts from the individuals we serve, the Phoenix Insider gives you a front-row seat as we work toward creating mobility solutions for the health and well-being of every person in every community. Join us on this journey as we pave the way for a more equitable and connected world.
So welcome to the show, everyone. I'm so excited today to have with us Joe Provenzano, the Director of Mobility and Volunteerism for Ford Philanthropy, here on the Phoenix Insider. So welcome to the show, Joe.
I'm excited to be here.
So a little about Joe before we dive into the conversation. Joe leads the integration of mobility solutions, volunteer engagement, and social impact at Ford Philanthropy. His team is tasked with layering mobility solutions and employee volunteer activation across Ford Motor Company's global enterprise in partnership with the community. And his experience includes leadership roles in business strategy, partnerships, autonomous vehicle operations, engineering, design, and product launch. So thank you so much for coming and being on the show today.
I'm excited to be here. I know when we talk mobility, we could probably talk for a really long time. So excited to be here and support.
Joe, as we get started, I always like to ask the question, what's your story? Who's Joe? Where did you grow up? What was your first job in high school or out of college? Tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, so I am born and raised here in Michigan. So I grew up on the east side. Ford has been part of, obviously, being employed at Ford. My father worked at Ford. My great-grandfather worked at Ford. I went to school at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. Got my degree in mechanical engineering. I have a master's in product development from the University of Detroit-Mercy. And so, family and commitment to Ford. I think when I look back, just the opportunities that I've had in the company to really move around and develop and evolve, and just mobility is such a big part of that. So excited to be here to talk about that, but just share a little bit about myself.
So when you talk about, your journey and, the variety of programs and projects that you've led, is there one that stands out to you, that you're like, this one was the most fun or the most the coolest one that you've done? Not that not all of them aren't cool, but is there one or two that you're like, this was my favorite?
Yeah, I think there's so many. I think one of the unique things that I've been able to experience at Ford is just the opportunity to try so many different things. So when I hired in, I was in manufacturing. I was able to launch vehicles in multiple different assembly plants. I've had experience in product development, solution engineering projects. I was in a group called Digital Innovation where we did three-dimensional builds of vehicles, try to find issues. So a lot of different opportunities. If I had to say that probably the two top would be this current position, which I'm excited to talk to you about today. But prior to this, I spent about 3.5 years in business development, self-driving vehicles.
Okay.
Which was just a really cool space. And I know that things have really evolved on, the art of the possible within self-driving vehicles. But in that position, I had the opportunity to wear a bunch of different hats, from, partnership building to integration with engineering to just the overall business development and thinking strategically, what would that look like? And so I really look back and think that was just a really fun time, because they also had a ton of exposure, not just in partnerships, but, mobility solutions. There's so many emerging technologies, micromobility, and a lot of those things came together. And it's sort of how I ended up here in Ford Philanthropy. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just grateful, I think, when I think about the company, just the opportunity to move around and continuously evolve.
Yeah, that's a huge benefit to working in an organization that has such a broad portfolio of programs and products and, locations all over the world. So thank you for sharing. So Phoenix Mobility Rising is a partner at Ford Philanthropy. What in particular about our mission is most impactful to you?
Wow, there's quite a few things. But I think the biggest thing that comes to mind, Valerie, we've talked about this before, is just the holistic view of how you're thinking about transportation access. I think you take that and then you combine it with just your hyper understanding of community needs and understanding in the way that Phoenix partners in community, and taking the time to understand that, every community is different, but every single person in the community is different. So, some of the conversations we've had, and you talk about, it could be a single mother with multiple kids, and there could be access to medical appointments or all these other things and these barriers that exist. The thing that I really appreciate is you as an organization are taking it on and saying, how can we look at that holistically to really try to make a difference and change conditions in people's lives? So, that's probably the biggest thing when I look at it. And to be honest, there's not a lot of organizations doing that work.
Thank you for saying that. And I think that's just really informed by the work that we've done over all 6 years that we've been around, is really understanding the solution when you put it together falls apart if it does not resonate with that person where they're at in that moment, down to the weather. And so no matter what solution you put in place, if the bus stop is 6 blocks away and it's negative 10-degree weather and you're carrying an infant in a carrier and you've got a toddler, you've got to look at, if that were you or if that was a family member, is that something that would be feasible? Is that something that they would feel safe? So on and so forth. And so many times we look at things from a product design perspective of, will this sell or can this scale, versus let's meet people where they are right now and then help as many people as we can, and then figure out what are the levers that can be rapidly increased to figure out what dimensions of the product design can be scaled versus everything needs to scale from the beginning. Yeah. And I think that is where, we've done a lot of programs where we were like, okay, we need to build this out. We need to launch this technology. And then nobody used it because, it was only as good as how many transportation providers or the reliability of the transportation providers. And if you're not working with like the front end of that experience, like to where you get in the car or when you get on the bus, what is that experience? People don't want to use it. So I think that's just been rapid iteration of trying things and failing, or trying things and pivoting and pivoting.
And that resonates. And I know we'll get into Ford philanthropy and the work that we do, but I think that hyper local voice, I know it's a big thing that we do across the work that we have at our global footprints, is listening to community. And then I think you're exactly right. There's so many emerging technologies, and sometimes the excitement of that technology overshadows like the purpose and the outcomes and what can happen with that technology and community. And so I think, we've seen probably a lot of that. And I think just going back to like why Phoenix, like I think that's a good sort of intersection point where that's a real big part of your mission focus. And it's also a really big part of how we're trying to show up in community, because, Ford Philanthropy can't do everything on its own, and we need partners and collaborators, but we also want to be really intentional about where can we make an impact, or does it make most sense for us to make it?
So can you give us an overview? So we've talked a little bit about it, and you guys are working all over the world. Tell us kind of what your key mission is and how that impacts or aims to impact communities. And then that being global, does that look different in other countries, or is the approach just kind of at a high level and then similar, it just kind of finesses based upon where you're working in the world?
Yeah, I think I'd start with just as a company, we've been around for 112 years, and mobility is what we do. It's our expertise. And when I think about the mission at the broader company, it's really making sure that everyone is free to move and pursue their dreams. And so when you think of that and that history and that expertise, it makes sense when you think of the philanthropy part. Like, where should we lean in? What should we do? And so, our mission is to partner with communities to move people upward and forward. So, in doing that, the way that we're set up is mobility is a big piece of that. So you'll see mobility as a through thread because it's something that I think resonates with people. That's something we would be doing and thinking about transportation access. So we try to make sure that's part of a lot of our grant making and our investments. And so we focus with 3 focus areas: education for the future of work. So thinking about those pathways to future job opportunities, especially in the mobility space. We have a focus area of entrepreneurship. So how do we diversify the pipeline of entrepreneurs? How do we make sure that there's access to capital and that's available? And then we also focus on essential services. And essential services is really, food security. There's a big part of that. There's access to medical care, in really building strong relationships in communities. So we do have community centers in some of our manufacturing locations. We have one here in Detroit. And those really allow us to build those hyper-local relationships, which I think we talked about earlier, which is such a strong connection. And I would say the last piece too is I also manage our volunteer program across the globe. And so in that instance, we're also looking to say, how can we leverage our employees and make it seamless for them to get involved? So I think you'll see a lot. And what we're trying to do is we continue to focus and evolve and make sure that we amplify impact, show up in the right way is taking those focus areas, really working with community partners and trying to elevate and amplify through not just the mobility solutions, but also our.
Yeah. And is there an opportunity you've done as a volunteer that you're like, this sealed the deal? Was there an activity or an initiative when you were not in Fort Philanthropy, but before then, when your AV project or other things where you participated and you're like, this fills my heart. Like
it's actually it's pretty cool to have the opportunity, and it's like an honor to be able to continue to evolve our volunteer program forward. Next year is going to be our 20th anniversary. Bill Ford, established the program, and he's still such a strong leader and proponent and voice in supporting the expansion and how do we continue to continuously improve. But when you ask that question, I also feel like in my career, there's been so many times where different leaders in different organizations had a passion for something that they did, and they brought people in. And so they're like, hey, I'm going to volunteer here. How many people in our team would like to go support that? So I think of St. Leo's Soup Kitchen. And I had just a supervisor that was super passionate about that. And just that experience on partnering with, at the time, it was Joe who ran the soup kitchen, just the connection and building relationships. Like that always sticks with me. I had volunteered, quite a few years at that location. And then the chance I brought my daughter as well. So she was able to experience that. But I think just the opportunity and, here at Ford, we're trying to continue. It's something that we do. It's part of the values of the family and the company. And it's something that I think volunteers allows us to sort of emphasize and continue to build in partnership. So that's great.
Yeah. And I think when team members are like that investment in, I'm not only doing this because it's fun, but it's so fun. I want to bring my family so they can share in that experience. I think that takes it to that next level. I mean, just that quality time to be able to feel in a space where you want to bring, somebody that you love to join you in that journey. I think that speaks volumes to how impactful volunteering is and what a difference that makes. Is there a day at the soup kitchen that you were like,
I think it was just because I had gone and had a relationship, especially with the person who has passed, Joe, that was like the glue. And so I think that was a big part of it, and then bringing my daughter. And then there's so many examples, especially now, because as we continue to build relationships, we're really thinking about that volunteer journey. Yep. It's different for everyone.
It really is.
And even understanding that not every nonprofit partner needs volunteers. So, showing up with a nonprofit partner position of like, where do we best fit in? How do we best support? I think of our partnership with Team Rubicon, which you might be familiar with, but it's a veteran-led organization that does disaster relief. And the reason I bring it up is we have the opportunity to let our employees deploy and go, especially since Hurricane Helene and Milton, and there's so much that needs to be done in resiliency and helping rebuild communities. But we have employees, and I had the opportunity to deploy with Team Rubicon last year, which was great because that organization is very much like we've talked about. They're community focused. Yep. They want to understand what are the needs, how do we best unlock other things to happen in progress in the community. So between St. Leo's Soup Kitchen and, several experiences with Team Rubicon, it's been a real pleasure to have the opportunity to work across the company to continue to evolve.
Fantastic. So when we think about kind of where, right, Ford has a huge footprint, but a lot of your work focuses on plant communities. Can you tell me a little bit about kind of how that evolved, or kind of why that's the kind of the thematic focus?
I think it's important, when we have manufacturing locations we are part of the community. We're there, we're in community every day. And so we think about the importance of where our employees are, where our manufacturing facilities are, and then how are we, part of that community. I think it's something that when you look back at the history of the company, it's something that, we've always done. And it's part of just the core value. So, we have investments in grant making across our plant locations here in the U.S., and then it's global. We're in more than 40 different countries globally. And so, when I think about it, because you would ask too, like, what's the difference globally, and how do you think about that? Every community is different.
Right.
So it goes back to what we talked about at the top, is how do you have the opportunity to really go deep and understand, like, where we can be most impactful in our work? And so we have those focus areas. And, when we go region to region or country to country, different things are a priority. And so, I think the great thing is we take learnings from all of the different areas, and we can find, solution sets and grant making investments and programs that we then have available if we see that it's a good fit in collaboration with partners. So I don't know if it necessarily changes globally. I think our priorities are still the same. It's just our approach and the way that we partner and collaborate sometimes differs just based on priorities and niche community.
Yeah. And I can also imagine just all the different things that when it comes to volunteering and communities, the role that government plays, the way that cities are laid out or rural areas are laid out, I'm sure that brings a lot of kind of variances. Are there any programs that you can think of where it's like, oh, that was an amazing program that we launched in Mexico, and we're going to bring it to a kind of somewhere in Asia, right? Or, just that kind of like cross-pollination of programs or ideas. You're like,
there's so many programs that we have. I think there's probably a lot that would fit that scenario. I know we spent a lot of time in Driving Skills for Life. I happen to manage that program. It's a teen safe driving program. And the reason I bring that one up is we've really, as we've progressed and that program's evolved, it's in its 21st year.
Oh my gosh.
Which is
one of the original.
It's a long time, but the adoption of that program globally and the forms that it took, and it's different. So like when you're in Europe and the roads there's more pedestrians on the road. There's a big focus on the shared road aspect, which we've incorporated that. And so we've taken those lessons learned because, even when we think about safety in urban locations and rural locations, all those things are different. But multiple road users and pedestrian fatalities get out the rise. So how can we think in that work in that program and the learnings that we're seeing from all these different locations, how can we try to bring those together to continuously improve that offering in that program? So that's one that sticks out. But we've been doing this this is our 75th anniversary. So, Ford has been at this for a long time, and there's so many great programs. And I think that's one of the things that we continue to focus on is how can we take those shared learnings and how can we amplify and bring solutions that make the most sense for our partners wherever we are.
Well, and that's a noble mission for the world. But I also have 2 teen drivers at home, Joe, now. Okay. So I'm really interested in this. Okay. We'll have to talk afterwards. So what do you think that are some, we talked about programs. What are some of the biggest challenges that you see plant communities faced with? And when you're working in your community, what are some of those things that, we talked about vulnerable users, but are there other kind of things that you see come up that are challenges and how does Ford philanthropy address it?
I think it's interesting because it's so specific to the different communities. I think when we talk mobility and transportation access, 3 things that come to the top is access to food, access to healthcare, and then access to employment. Now, those aren't all of the things. There's transportation requirements for so many different things in people in community, but those are things that are lifted up as things that are needs across most of our communities. I think our team's done a really good job because we really, as we focused in the last 3 years on how can we differentiate and really lean into our expertise and ability, we've also done a lot of work in our plant communities. That means going there. It means visiting nonprofit partners. It's talking with community leaders. It's looking at existing data. So we're not asking for additional data because there's so much information that exists. And so I think starting to hone in on that, and we see different things, like you're a great partner in West Tennessee. And so that is a rural community. And so they have very specific needs where the transportation infrastructure is not there. So those needs are really different than what we might see here in Detroit, just because there's more infrastructure, there's more of a supported ecosystem across just services that are needed. And so I think it really becomes specific, but I think that the healthcare, the food, and employment are 3 areas that, in a lot of the different ways we touch, and are areas of importance to members of communities where we have voice.
Yeah, and I think in the work in Stanton in West Tennessee, when we first started kind of learning about the challenges in the community and the need in the community, and then collaborating with just the partners and them sharing about their dreams, and taking the original schoolhouse and supporting renovating the building, it was supported by a pastor that is in the community, and her sharing her passion for, this was one of the first schoolhouses that African American children went to school at, and where prosperity began. And now, over time it gets expensive, buildings age, and it's been vacant for many years. But now with Ford Philanthropy's support, it's coming alive again. Yeah. And the local community is in the driving seat down to the paint color, and I think there's a lot of times when intentions are good and everything is in line, but when you take it down to, where should we launch this? Where does it mean the most to you? And how can we make the biggest difference at that soul level? Not even just what's going to look good as we drive through the town and people will see, but where's the heart of the community? Yeah. And to know that this building played such a vital role in Stanton, in Haywood County, and then to know that we're bringing this building to life, and we're going to fill it with laughter, and we're going to fill it with more prosperity and hope, and with jobs that pay 4x times kind of the average median income in the community. There'll be hundreds of those opportunities within steps of this building. And you think about the impact on the children, and they're now building another school. And so I think that's just such an inspiring story about how philanthropy enables local community members in wherever they're at, with their faith and their heart and their community, to really leverage the experience and the resources to take it back to the roots, and then say, where do we want to go and dream for the future?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And even for some of the viewers that might not have the whole context, we are building a battery facility in that location. And so, like in any other plant community that we show up, it was important to do what you said, understand the community, what resonates with the community, what is the heart of the community. Our goal is, for the residents that are there, how can we be a support and a partner to make sure that as that economy changes, that they're rising with everyone else, and they have access to all the different things and resources and changes that are going to happen. We want to make sure that they're part of that. So yeah, I think that it's important to think about how that relates, but I also think that's really our approach when we think about all of our manufacturing cities.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to learn about more of them. So, talking about government, nonprofit, community organizations, how does Ford Philanthropy, bring together the tapestry, if you will, or pull together the quilt, right? So it's complicated. Yeah. Every community is different. Every political economy is different. How does Ford leverage that and kind of bridge those resources together? What's your perspective on how that works together?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think a lot of my experience in my prior position actually prepared me quite a bit for philanthropy, even though it wasn't philanthropy, it was self-driving vehicle business development. But there's a lot of work to do with communities and partners. And it's sort of how we talked about earlier. Like, you have an emerging technology. Well, it's great, but if it's not solving someone's needs in community, then what's the purpose? A big part of that position was partnering with community, understanding, the government regulations, understanding the different municipalities. What can we do? Where is the need? How could this solve that? So when you ask that question, I think it just goes back to the collaboration piece. And I think more on the mobility side, it's not only different by community, but it's different by state with regulations. So Absolutely. I know you know that 100%. We talk about that a lot, but I think it's really important to have those three aspects. There has to be the public-private philanthropic partnership to really maximize and unlock the impact that we can have in community. And I think, some locations it might be favorable for solutions than others, but that gets back to these shared learnings.
Right.
So now we have, this information, we now have collected this data, we now have these outcomes, we now have these human stories of change or condition change that people have experienced, and we can carry those forward. So, when I think about that, I think it's critical. It's, you have to have those three pieces in play if you're really going to make sustainable change in the long term. So I know it's something that you spend a lot of time. We spend time talking about that, but I think it's absolutely critical. We have to have those three.
Yeah. And I think your point about AVEs and all the different dimensions of when you're working with autonomous vehicles, whether that be the regulations for how do you pull over an AV? Obviously there's a safety driver, but the law enforcement is such a big part of that. Fire and rescue. Yeah. And when you're working with firefighters and police officers, many times they are the heart of the sitting next to the teachers, right? Their children are in the schools, they're coaches for the volunteer football teams, all those kind of things. And so those perspectives and those questions that come out in the AV space are also the same questions that you see in philanthropy, safety, regulations, especially if you're working with nonprofits that have federal or state grants, because there's, and in transportation, I think the phrase I like to use, there's 1,100 regulations for every dollar you spend in a transportation agency. So you got to be, there's a lot of things where there's for all the reasons to kind of really navigate that carefully and leveraging the interest of how does the private sector get the most benefit out of this partnership? How does the community get the most benefit out of the partnership? And then how do elected officials and regulatory framings impact how that can come together and sustain or support just from a variety of dimensions.
But I think to your point, even you look at, I look at a lot of our nonprofit partners and philanthropy can't pay for everything.
Right.
And so I think your point is getting to, how can we change and work across those three, public, private, philanthropic, to make sure, because philanthropy is needed and our dollars are needed. We also can't bring services to communities and then take them away. So I think it's really important leaning into that framework, because that's where we're going to get to sustainable solutions that change conditions. And, that's important. And it's not something that gets solved overnight, and it's different in every community, but, partnerships like the partnership we have, and then also bringing more collaborators, and we need more funders. It's not just Ford Motor Company. It's, the other OEMs, it could be other foundations. So just continuing to think about that focus of bringing more people to access more community is absolutely critical.
And I think for any of our listeners who are really trying to solve transportation challenges in their own community, I think, one of the biggest partnerships is collaborating with public transit, right? Because those federal transit dollars, when it comes to mobility management and supporting the development of kind of these mobility pilots and programs, many times can be 80% offset by those federal transit dollars, but they need that 20% local. Yeah. And I think that's to your point, that public-private partnership by the government's design says the local community has to have skin in the game. And And to your point, like in a plant community, those members are in the community. They are the literal people in the community bringing that support. And so I think the government's piece of that and the role of public transit and the role of the state Department of Transportation and public transit programs, really, if you're working in your community trying to solve this issue, is something to look at and to reach out and try and figure out, hey, I didn't even know there was public transit in my community. I can't count on my fingers, toes, and all the notebooks on my bookshelf how many times we've worked in a community talking to a partner and they're like, I didn't even know I had public transit. And one of my favorite stories, I was walking into a rural courthouse trying to find the public transit headquarters, which was in the basement. And I walked in the front door and I was like, talked to the gal at the counter. And I was like, oh, I'm here to visit with the public transit director. And they're like, we don't have buses around here. And literally it was 2 floors down, same building, but they did not realize that public transit existed in their community. So it's an uphill climb because on top of the 1100 regulations, there's a lot of things around marketing and promotion you have to be super careful about. And so it's really hard to, shout from the mountaintops, there's a rural bus in our county, because the volume, the distances. Yeah. And so that bus is out on the road. Many times there are more cows that see that bus than people in some rural communities.
I think that just makes me think why some of the work that you are doing in Phoenix with the transportation systems up, just the dot connecting sometimes is a big deal. And dot connecting, not just between just transportation service opportunities, but like all the other things that are needed as far as mental health, well-being. You could list all of the service, food security, all these things become almost a collective or an ecosystem that sometimes they operate independently, but if we can find those points of synergy, that's where we get to real change and impact. So it is definitely a work in progress, but it takes partners in collaboration to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of coffee. So everybody is really passionate about sustainability and our climate and the future. And there's a lot of energy and resources going towards an electric future or a hydrogen future or an hybrid future. How does Ford Philanthropy's impact and programs also intertwine with that kind of future vision of, how do we reduce our climate footprint?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And the first thing that I think about is, within Ford Motor Company, Bill Ford in particular has been a leader on, environmental and climate, for the longest time. And so he's a true visionary. And I think it was about 25 years ago, we were the first company in the industry to release a sustainability report. And so I think when we think about our philanthropic work, we're really focused on things outside of that because, we're tasked every day just based on the mission and the value of not just the Ford family, but the company of sustainability needs to be part of what we do. And so when I think about how we bring those together, it's really sort of partnership. A lot of the work that we do is as we're having these discussions in community and finding and understanding need, are there opportunities to bring the enterprise along? Can we lean into things? Do we have nonprofit partners that benefit from, electrification and electrified fleet? Do we have unique features and solutions, or do we have unique resources within our employees, skill-based volunteering that can amplify and support? So I think in the sustainability piece, I'm really proud of the work that the company does overall, and it's really focused. And we do quite a bit of volunteering, integration across the enterprise in so many different ways. In our partnership with Bob Holy Cross, who was our VP of Sustainability and Safety, is a really strong relationship, supporting road safety and driving skills for life, and a host of other programs. But it really becomes important too in our manufacturing footprint. So our manufacturing communities, that's a place where we continue to evolve and listen and go deeper, because that piece combined with the impact that we're dealing with grant making dollars is the way that really allows us to help people move forward and upward. So it's definitely key to what we do.
Yeah, I think my first interaction and understanding, so growing up on a dairy farm in small town in Nebraska, you don't think about your climate footprint, right?
Yeah.
And my first foray was we had a project when I was at the University of Nebraska on reducing diesel emissions. And it was around installing auxiliary power units and skirts on semi-trucks to reduce idling and improve their fuel efficiency.
No easy task.
Right, yeah. But it was fascinating that, truckers were sitting in their trucks trying to stay warm or trying to stay cool. And they would idle their trucks for, hours and hours and hours and putting that carbon up into the community. And then, what really hit me when I was like, okay, well, yeah, is that their cause, but then when you talk about the families that are impacted, you talk about environmental justice, where around the communities, that's when I was like, this is why this is important. That yes, we want, I'm all about, we need to sustain our planet. We need to do all this stuff. But for me right now, today, it's those kids who are struggling with asthma or older adults in the community who have COPD. What can we do to make sure that we're not doing anything to harm the community or reduce the harm in the community when it comes to being able to sleep at night and breathe, or be able to play in the basketball team and those kind of things.
And I think there's examples of it too. I think of some of our other nonprofit partners. Vision to Learn is an organization that is operating in 15 states, but they bring access to eye care in partnership with school districts. And so we have provided them a grant last year to expand some of their work near Ohio Assembly Plant. And so they're going to probably be able to serve about 15,000 kids in hardship. And what they do is they usually use a transit-size, vehicle that is a mobile office to actually do the eye exam. So they'll go and they'll do an eye exam or a screening, then an eye exam, and then they come back the third time in these mobile units and they actually provide glasses.
Oh my gosh!
And I bring this up on the sustainability piece. The other benefit there too is they also struggle with the ability to keep, when it's really hot out, they want to keep that mobile office cool. And if it's really cold, they want to keep it warm.
Yes.
So that's one of their biggest struggles. But if you had an EV, an e-transit, you could drive that right into the school.
Absolutely.
It then allows them to do the work. It's emissions free. You've negated some of the things that you're talking about, but it also has unique solution set, which, I think in our work, we're thinking about where can our products and our services and our employees and our grant dollars, where can they make the most difference? In partnerships like that, it really just sticks out as an opportunity. Our F-Series trucks with hybrid trucks is another example where sometimes, we'll ask the enterprise to get involved. And the enterprise will come along like they did in the Team Rubicon relationship. And, the enterprise will get involved in making a donation of vehicles to support, because those can make a difference. ProPower on board is a generator that's built into F-150s, and that's like portable power that's resiliency for nonprofits and communities. So, that's another task that we have is how do we work across the enterprise to allow them to get engaged in community? Obviously, our philanthropic dollars can't support initiatives that are benefiting the company, but we definitely can make sure that we're connecting dots to efficiencies and application of work in community. So it all goes back to that sustainability piece. And it can take life in so many different ways.
Yeah. And I can completely appreciate when you're in one of those mobile vans and it's hot or it's colder. I remember when, you brought that up and I was like, I can see it as clear as day, because in a rural school, the health department would come in this massive mobile unit, and you would go into that and you'd have to wait in line outside in the heat. And then you'd go in there. And there was one day that the AC went out. And those nurses, their shirts were drenched with sweat. Yeah. And the students were in there. And I remember particularly because you have to put your head up against the little doula bobber when you're doing your eye exam. Yeah. And it was so gross wiping that off, because it was like 3 kids before you wipe it off, but you've been standing outside sometimes 20, 30 minutes. It's like 95 degrees. So the ability to keep those vans cool and not smell like diesel fumes, especially in the cold day that gets in your lungs, all the things. So just such incredible work that is being done. And still good days.
And it's constantly evolving, which is the best.
So let's talk about the future, Joe. What do you see? What future plans?
Crystal ball?
Yeah, what's your crystal ball at Ford Philanthropy in moving forward? Is there anything in particular?
I think we definitely, I think we've come a long way in just continue to enhance and focus like our strategic framework, building on the values of the company, the expertise of the company, the relationships that we built over 75 years as a philanthropic, company. But I think a big part of this is the continued learning that we talked about. So where do we go deeper? Where do we go bigger? Where do we invest more? And I think that really has to be based on where are we having the most impact? Where does it make the most sense for Ford Philanthropy to show up? And I think, last year, I think I mentioned we invested a little over $5 million in mobility solutions. And this year we'll be at about $7 million. And so in just the mobility space, because again, that's a cross thread through all of our focus areas, it's been this progression of learning. And so we talk about, the public-private philanthropic relationships. So we're seeing those dynamics. So when I think of the future, I think it's doubling down. It's understanding what impact is actually happening in the community. And then I think we've really done a good job of understanding that we need to be in community to understand the community. Yep. And so looking at those grants that we've made over the last couple of years, continuing to build really deep relationships with nonprofit partners, because you all are the experts. The community members are the experts, and we're here to amplify, unlock, and support innovative solutions. So I think when we think about moving forward, we want to continue to dig deep on the mobility and transportation access. How can that be something that is a really strong through thread in all our grant making, not just in the U.S. but globally. So that's sort of where I think the immediate future goes. And then there's always emerging technologies too that I think come into play. So being really keen to what those are, and like I mentioned, bringing the enterprise. Being a good partner to the enterprise. Our enterprise is already driven by community purpose and how they think about products and services. But how can we sort of be the conduit to those detailed and hyper-local voices in community that really have a meaningful impact, like the Vision to Learn solution that you're solving on multiple things, or Pro Power on Board as an auxiliary power or portable power for a food bank, or for access during a disaster, where the first thing that goes out is power. A hybrid vehicle with a generator in the back is like a perfect solution for some of our nonprofit partners. So I think those are the areas that we would focus on as we continue forward. And then learn and bring more people in.
Yeah. And so how can other organizations or other stakeholders get involved with your mission? So I think, if I'm in Stanton or I'm in Chicago or another community, how do I plug in? I'm listening to this podcast. I'm a commissioner, or I'm a council member, or I'm a city planner. What's the best way for them to connect?
Well, I think the first thing is, in our plant communities, we try to do a really good job on outreach with community leaders, local government. Just to make sure that as we're doing work, especially in some of our new manufacturing locations, we have a whole organization that's committed to building those community relations, and then we really think about how are we supporting the community with our philanthropic dollars. So I would suspect in a lot of cases we are reaching out, but fordphilanthropy.org, check out the work that we're doing, and if there's synergies, we want to hear from people. If there's opportunities that we can support. If there's unique use cases across sort of the footprint that we've talked about today, we're interested in having discussions. Like these discussions lead to learnings. I think of some of the other things that we're doing, and I didn't mention all of these, but we work with Feeding America as a national food partner, and we have a really unique partnership with them and DoorDash right now, Project Dash, which you're familiar with, and we grant dollars to community food banks in our plant communities, where sometimes there's a need to get food access to people that don't have the ability to either, have access to transportation, or they're not able to get there. And so that project's been great in like 2 or 3 of our plant facilities, where we've really partnered with the local food banks, and the project Dash teams has been great at DoorDash. And so things like that were just out of conversation. They were out of, collaboration. It was out of ideas, and things come to life. So I think, check out the work that we do in our organization. And, we want to hear from people. We want to hear from community, because we're always willing to have a conversation. As any funder, you cannot fund there. There's limited dollars. So you have to be strategic in how you can best support community. Which I'm really proud of how we try to manage that across the organization. But just because I can't grant dollars to someone doesn't mean I can't connect them to a solution that solves a lot of the needs that they may have, or another funder. Yeah. So I think of it as a community, right? It's a community of how are we moving everyone forward and upward? And, Forward Plan 3 is not going to do it on our own. So we are interested in corporate partnerships, philanthropic partnerships, and really trying to just continue to move people and change conditions that people see every day.
And I think that Project Dash example is such a beautiful kind of that trifecta, where you have, a foundation, you have a private sector company, an innovative leader in how are we getting folks their food or resources that they need, and really leveraging that to impact local nonprofits, because that program for $5 or $7, depending on the package size, to be able to deliver a box of food or a home care kit, or those kind of resources, that's transformative. A nonprofit leader myself, you can't pay mileage for what that expense is, and the Dashers love it too. In their communities, when you get those things, and I'm delivering these food boxes to family members in my community, or I'm delivering these care kits to women with young children, and it's all boats rise. And I think that's where, Phoenix Mobility Rising, that partnership, those collective impact, and the ability to, again, even continue to make those partnerships and pay it forward is such an incredible thing. So,
and I think too, as you were saying, I was just thinking and that's part of that partnership can blend into the partnership that we have with you as another ability to solve access to food in certain markets. I think of our partnership with United Way of Southeast Michigan and the work that they're doing in the Ride United program. There's so many synergies there. And you all just had that amazing grant to continue to move that work forward. So I think a lot of these things come full circle. Mm-hmm. And having those open lines of communication and always leaning into community voice is the way that we can make the most progress.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Joe, can we close out this episode full of insightful information and great conversation with some rapid fire questions?
Yes.
All right. Strap in. Okay. Mobility. Okay. Say these are 1 minute or less. Fill in the blank. Mobility equity is
access.
Ooh. Okay. What is one piece?
Access.
Absolutely. And I think we had a focus group on Tuesday, and one of the gentlemen talked about dignity.
Oh, that's an accurate great too.
I was just right in the heart to be able to just, go where you need to go in independence. Okay. What is one piece of leadership advice that is so great you must share it, or so awful you have to warn people about it?
One piece of leadership advice. I've always been a big proponent. I don't know if this is advice that I've just gained over time, but I'm constantly engaging with others on how they would solve problems, because I do think for me, it's a little unique in the philanthropy space because my background isn't necessarily philanthropy. So I had an opportunity to work in so many different places here at Ford. But I do appreciate, as I've come into philanthropy, so many things that I've done in other parts of my career, I've thought, would this work in philanthropy? And so engaging thought partners and just being open to feedback, I think is one thing. And the other thing is I'm big on culture. Like I want people to enjoy what they're doing. I want people to love what they're doing. And I think a big part of that is just being very candid in conversation. When you think about, expectations of what we're trying to do. And so having just really honest conversations, I would say it's probably a piece.
I 100% agree with you. I think the quote that comes to mind is culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah.
So if you can have the best business plan in the world, but if you don't have a team that's behind each other and behind the mission and the vision, that strategy is just going to sit there.
That's true. It's absolutely true.
All right. Something fun. What is the last TV show you binged on and loved?
Jeez.
Come on, Joe.
I'm gonna be honest because my wife Jen would probably laugh. We start to binge a lot of shows and I end up falling asleep. So if your question was what was the last TV show that you tried to binge and fall asleep to? What was the one that we were watching last night? I was literally sleeping. It's maybe because I fall asleep too.
Okay, let's try this one. Favorite concert of all time?
Favorite concert of all time. I've been to some cool concerts. This concert was a while ago. When growing up, I was a big Metallica fan, believe it or not.
I cannot see that.
You think it's going to come? But I would say that I love tons of different types of music. But I hadn't been to a concert at Comerica Park.
Okay.
And I went to the Metallica concert there. And the experience was, I wouldn't say that, hey, this is the best place for just being up close, having a chance to see Metallica because I was a fan as a kid, but I never really saw them as an adult. So that's one that sticks out to me recently.
Okay. So what's your favorite song that Metallica does? Gosh. Come on now.
I always think it's funny when I'm watching, shows that I feel like there's so many different songs that come up that they use. I think Enter Sandman is the one that everyone would say, but I don't know if I could choose. There's just so many.
Okay. All right. Okay. If you could wave your magic wand and solve one aspect of inequity in transportation, what would it be?
Wave my magic wand.
Yes. And it was filled with lottery tickets.
The freedom that you have when you have a vehicle without having to have a vehicle. If that makes sense.
Teleportation.
And no, but I guess what I'm trying to say is you could say, I wish everyone had access to transit, but transit doesn't solve everything. Public transit doesn't solve everything. Having an ability to have a magic wand that does the work that Phoenix is doing, I'm serious, like in connecting all of these different opportunities to make it more streamlined for people to get to where they want to go and just really embrace the freedom of movement. I think that would be amazing. And you're working on it, so I'm not too worried about it.
We have lots of magic wands at Phoenix, but I don't think we're working on the magic wand factory at Phoenix. Okay, last question. What is one thing that is significantly under-discussed in the transportation industry that you feel not enough people talk about? And you work at the intersection of a lot of really complicated challenges in communities that are so broad, we said 40 countries, 75 years. You've seen a lot, you've done a lot, you've talked to a lot of folks, but what do you think needs to be more a part of the conversation around boardrooms and dinner tables?
I don't know if this is too high level, but I think one of the things that comes to my mind is having the conversation about mobility and transportation access up front in the development process.
Oh, hallelujah.
So I think we know mobility is expensive, right? So and sort of like I said about volunteers, or not every nonprofit can benefit from volunteers. So we can't just say, hey, we want to do a volunteer project. It's the same with mobility. Like managing a fleet of vehicles or a vehicle, you have maintenance, you have oil changes, you have insurance, you have driver costs. Like there's all of these things that go into play. So I think there's so much opportunity in the mobility space for you all to have impact and for more people and more funders to come to the table, because I don't think we necessarily always have the discussion around access to services that are being created on the front end.
Yep.
And then I think a big part of what we try to do is we try to look for the experts that actually have some expertise in fleet management. And what are you doing, and how can we then come and amplify the work that you're doing? So I would say that's the biggest thing for me is like, how do we move the conversation forward?
Yep.
How do we have the conversation in the co-development of programming, whether it's housing, whether it's food access, whether whatever it might be, because you can have the greatest program in the world, but if you don't have access and the community can't get there, that's where sometimes I feel like there's that miss. But if we could continue to push that conversation to the front in the development phase and make sure that it's human-centered and focused on community voice, I think it's what people say.
Yeah, I cannot echo. Amen, Joe, because I think one of the most demonstrative examples of that challenge is we were working in a community which will be unnamed, and they put the food pantry or the food emergency food location at a building where it was affordable and they were able to get it, but there was no bus stop or sidewalk near where the food access point was. Like it was almost like 2 miles away for the closest bus stop.
Yeah.
And this conversation around how are people going to get to us, and how are people going to carry their wares, and are we making it accessible? If I'm a wheelchair user and I need to get to the building, there's no sidewalks to even get to, past just a personal entryway. And so I think that, that was another great example of, like you said, it's got to be a part of the conversation up front, down to when you're building something or you're setting up your program or your project. Rural hospitals are facing this challenge where, people the care is there, but people can't get there.
Yep.
And so it doesn't matter how good the doctors are. It doesn't matter how much you try and, make the hospital cost efficient and effective. If people can't get in those doors, it doesn't matter. And I think that pushing that conversation forward is absolutely vital to solving this challenge and addressing. Maybe that's the magic wand piece. Hey, I got an idea. First, we need to make sure people can get there. What does that look like? Because, like, I know in the social determinants of health, we talk about, we're always pulling people out of the river downstream, and we need to go further upriver and find out how people are falling in. And I feel like that is such a big part of mobility and mobility innovation. So with that, Joe, any final words, any final remarks as we wrap up our show today?
Yeah, just appreciate the time and the opportunity to come here and talk mobility. And I really appreciate the work that you are doing as a leader in the mobility space, and then the work that you, Phoenix organization is doing. So we look to continue to partner. And then, as we said, we're interested in collaboration and partnership. And so we look forward to continuing to try to find ways to move people forward and upward.
Sounds amazing. So Joe, thank you for your time and being here and all the incredible support you provide Phoenix and just the ability to learn, as Mr. Phoenix's really first strong partnership with a major global corporation and with a philanthropy organization in that role. And our mission is mobility solutions for the health and well-being of every person, every community, and to learn how to leverage the capacity and the talent and the ideas and the strategy from an organization that's 7 years old. We got a long way to go. We're reaching second grade now, but we're working on it, and just appreciate your support. So thank you for being here.
Well, thanks, Matt.
Thanks for joining us on the Phoenix Insider, where we explore the road to mobility equity together. Don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with your network to keep the conversation going. Together, we can break down transportation barriers and create lasting change. Visit phoenix.org to find out how you can help improve access for everyone. We'll catch you next time on the Phoenix Insider as we continue driving forward toward a more equitable future.